People really live 900 years like the Bible says.
All right, let's see it.
Yeah, and
Sorry to butt back in here so abruptly, but that little yeah at the beginning is the only time in this entire video that anyone directly addresses the question that was asked, and it just asserts an affirmative answer and provides absolutely no substantiating data whatsoever. And the reason is clear. There are no data that support any of these lifespans that exceed 100 years in the Hebrew Bible, because people didn't live that long back then. These ages, according to all of the data that we have, are fiction. They are made up, just like the Sumerian king list long before, where kings are reigning for tens of thousands of years before the flood, and then only 12 or 1300 years after the flood. And then when we get to the Akkadian versions during the Neo-Babylonian period, which are the literary inspirations for a lot of what's going on in the primeval history and the rest of Genesis, they're only like 500 years or so, which aligns more with what we find in Genesis. So the data indicate these are fiction, but rather than consider that, what the rest of this video is going to do is tear down straw men that are actually apologetic attempts to try to preserve the accuracy of the numbers while also reconciling them with what we know about actual human lifespans. And they're going to say that doesn't work. So the tacit claim is that we have to default then to imagining that they are historical, rather than defaulting to what all the data indicate, that they are fictional, which is a bridge too far for apologists.
a lot of people try to toss that away and say, well, maybe they had different calendars, or, they try to shorten it. Maybe they didn't have a solar or a lunar calendar. Maybe, we divide it by 10 and they had their own kind of calendar. But the problem with that is you have people who live 969 years. If you divide that by 10, it's like, okay, maybe 96 years. That would be more palatable. But the problem is you have people also in Genesis 5, like Enoch, who have children at 65. So if it's 1/10, that means he had kids at 6, and that doesn't work. And so what we find, the Bible comes and says, yes, they lived really long, that God says he doesn't want them to live that long anymore, and so he reduces the span of human life down to 120.
Which didn't really seem to take, because there are a bunch of characters in the Bible who lived much longer than 120 years, who were not born until after Noah's flood. Sarah lived 127 years. Abraham lived 175 years. Job lived 140 years. Isaac lived 180 years. Jacob lived 147 years. Levi, Amram, Aaron, Jehoiada, they all lived over 120 years, because this is a cobbling together of a bunch of different traditions that is not perfectly consistent, and this is just like in the Sumerian king lists and the Neo-Babylonian versions before these authors. This is fiction.
But something happened, and the cataclysm of the flood, whether it's a genetic bottle, environmental changes, or immune systems, or whatever, the life expectancy began to drop precipitously after the flood.
So none of this constituted actual data to support the argument that, yes, people really did live this long. These are just attempts to say, if we presuppose they did live this long, here are all the scenarios that are not in evidence that we might be able to gin up to make it coherent, since we've already agreed that it is actual history. And the reality is that it is not. It is fiction. And the fit for this video has been Superman.